Hello, and welcome to this episode of Mining Matters, a part of the In Dialogue series hosted by the Non-Fuel Minerals and Mining Research Team, led by Dr. Rajesh Chadha at the Center for Social and Economic Progress, New Delhi. We invite experts from India and abroad to discuss how India's mining sector can become a catalyst for economic growth and development, ensuring fair and sustainable mining practices for the environment and affected communities.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth episode of Mining Matters on mineral-led development and sustainability. I'm very happy to welcome today Professor Asmita Kabra as our speaker today. Dr. Kabra is a professor at the School of Human Ecology, Ambedkar University, Delhi. She is also the founder and president of the NGO Adharshila and founder and trustee of the NGO Samrakshan Trust, which works for sustainable and dignified livelihoods, education in the Chambal region of central India. With almost 3 decades of teaching experience, her expertise encompasses critical development studies, political ecology, just transition, social impact assessment, agrarian change, livelihoods, and forced displacement. So, welcome, Professor Kabra,
Thank you.
today. Okay, all right. So, just to give you a brief description of today's mining matters, today's discussion. We would like to discuss the socio-economic and normative impacts of mining, implications of existing policies and regulations on sustainable mining, mining-induced land conflicts, displacement, resettlement, and different environmental, social, and governance factors of critical minerals. So, India's mining and mineral sector has often been criticized for not being sustainable enough or responsible enough, particularly with relation to benefiting the local communities and the environment. However, despite India's geological potential for a mineral-led economic development, minerals-enriched regions often face multitude of inequalities in terms of loss of land, livelihoods, biodiversity loss, then implications on their health, like some of the poorest communities where they inhabit in this country with a very significant mineral resources, where the development of mining could actually help bring in jobs and wider social development. So, in this context, existing policies like the National Mineral Policy, then Ministry of Mines efforts on Sustainable Development Framework, then different sections and amendments of MMDR Act, which is Mines and Minerals Development and Regulation Act, mine closure policies, which aim to effective closure of a mining in a post-mining scenario. So these policies do exist, and there are a lot of efforts to check or to evaluate the overall sustainability footprint of the mining companies. So my question to you, Professor Kabra, is that how are these policies or these instruments which are existing been able to address these challenges and this inequality in the mining region and the sustainability aspect? So over to you, Professor Kabra.
Thank you. I'd like to thank CSEP for inviting me, first of all, and giving me this opportunity to reach out to a wider audience. On your question of policy safeguards, first of all, let me begin by saying that we need to make a distinction between policies and laws. And I must point out that laws are a much stronger safeguard, right, than policies, because they're enacted through parliament and they're something that can be taken to a court of law and made to stick much more than policies. They also don't go through such rapid changes with changes in ruling parties and regimes and so on. Yeah, so there's no doubt at all that minimizing social and environmental harm from mining requires a much stronger legal backing in the form possibly of a law that enshrines the principle of sustainability as well as benefit sharing with local communities, which should be a part and parcel of our national vision for sustainable mining. It's there, it's articulated in the policies, but it needs to be stronger and legally actionable in the form of a law. Now, on the fact that the people affected by mining are some of the poorest and the most vulnerable and most marginal sections, and the idea of a resource curse is not new. It's been written about in the literature that some of the most resource-rich regions happen to also house some of the poorest people. So this is not new, and it is something that needs thinking about. Why is it that despite these policy safeguards on ground, uh, you know, uh, things don't really work out? So the broader point I wish to make, I think, is that whether it is about the national mineral policy or the system of star rating of mines or other environmental and social safeguard policies, which are driven either by national or international donor frameworks, uh, the point is that the efforts that we put in the formulation of good policies is important, no doubt. But there seems to be an unwavering belief that if the right policy can be found, then automatically the situation on the ground will move towards desirable outcomes. In other words, we make this seamless connection between the policy, the process of its implementation, and the outcome on the ground. Uh, and this is something that we really need to rethink. I mean, look at India's policy landscape and legal landscape. We have the world's most progressive policies when it comes to land acquisition, when it comes to forest rights, when it comes to employment guarantees, food security, etc. And yet, if we look at actual outcomes, inequality, unemployment, environmental damage are actually rising. So clearly, this assumption that policy automatically results in good outcomes itself needs to be examined. Now, I think of this phenomenon, this unwavering belief we have in just finding the right policy. I think of this as a kind of policy fetishism. Yeah. And rather than a blind belief in the ability of good policies to deliver, we need to actually critically examine under what circumstances, not just what are good policies, but under what circumstances will good policies result in good outcomes. Also the counterfactual. When do good outcomes result even when there isn't a good policy in place? Because the outcomes are divergent across different mining states. So what explains the differences is also something that we need to think about. And it is here that social scientists have a lot to contribute, because this is our bread and butter. We examine state processes and outcomes. I'll talk more about it later, maybe as a response to some of your other questions.
All right, very helpful. As you rightly mentioned, that the formulation of policy is very important, and it is very different that the formulation and designing of policy and the actual implementation of those policies or acts at the grassroots level, both are very different. The latter needs more monitoring and evaluation, a strong, environment. So, in terms of policy, so there is an existing bodies named district mineral foundations in the mining arena, which was actually established for the betterment of mining affected areas and people as per the amendment of MMDR Act 2015. And it's been now 8 years since DMF has been established. But and a percentage or a share of the royalty by the mining companies, this goes to the DMF fund. And the good thing about DMF fund is that it doesn't get lapsed over the years. It gets accumulated over the years so that the DMF fund can be utilized even when the mineral resources get exhausted in a certain area. However, we come across many news or many things that DMF fund is getting misutilized, and in one of our CSEF discussion paper also, we have discussed that across the sector or across the states, the fund utilization of DMF has not been very effective, or actually the DMF hasn't been very really effective to fulfill its objectives of a central government scheme called Pradhan Mantri Khanij Kshetra Kalyan Yojana. So, so how do you think that how far has the DMF as an instrument or as a policy to dig deeper into the policy analysis has been able to achieve the purpose of fulfilling its objectives of the PM Triple KY Yojana for the betterment of mining affected areas and people community, despite being in place for more than 8 years now?
Yeah, Tanima, I would think that we need to make a distinction once again between necessary and sufficient conditions. So the existence of funds to offset environmental and social harm is a necessary condition, yeah, to get good outcomes. It's not a sufficient condition. So I think DMF is again a classic example of that policy fetishism, and we are thinking of a technical solution to an inherently political problem, which is how the world of techno managers works, right? We think that these technological and managerial solutions set aside a little bit of money and then trust that it will get used. Now, just the fact that the DMF money has been accumulating year after year after year, I mean, it's a great thing it doesn't lapse. But why is it accumulating while poverty is accumulating in these mining areas, right? Is something that needs to be thought of. And it is, where you said that it's a monitoring and evaluation issue. I want us to sort of, push the envelope a little bit and say that it's not just a monitoring and evaluation or a governance issue. Very often in the technical or the managerial world, this governance black box is something that is never really opened. Yeah. And it's a black box that needs to be opened and examined. And it is here that we need to have theories to understand why the money lying in DMF funds either goes unutilized and keeps accumulating, or when it's spent, even it gets elite captured. It's not really, it starts from the top of the local sort of power dynamics. It benefits the better off people first and then gradually goes down and often never reaches the truly marginalized. Yeah. Again, this is not something that is typical to mining alone. It is true of development in general, right? In case after case of development schemes, this has been our experience. Now, so for example, the India Center for Just Transition brought out a report some years ago where they suggested that the DMF should be used for clean energy transition. You should have that money being spent on distributed RE projects, renewable energy projects, yeah, so that they had sort of an example, or they had actually done some calculations that if we were to use the DMF funds to set up 100 solar villages, solarize all health, nutrition, and education centers, deploy 1,000 off-grid solar water pumps, create 150 solar entrepreneurship entrepreneurs, I'm citing from their report, per district, and provide seed funding support, then all of these things together would, in each coal district, for example, coal mining district, it would generate between 12 to 18 megawatt of solar capacity. And the actual investment requirements are way below the money that is available in the DMF accruals in each of the major mining districts. So my point is the solutions are out there. But if we rely on district authorities to implement them, then the current trend of underutilization and the missing out of the true beneficiaries will probably continue. And this can only be fixed because it's a political issue. It's a political problem. Its solution has to be political. And the solution is a deep and genuine decentralization and democratic deliberation. But somehow, when it comes to actually letting the affected people take control of these funds, the policymaker and the manager has an inherent fear that the rural communities are not capable enough to do this. They can't manage the money. They will probably drink it away or they will waste the money. And I want to just draw our attention to the fact that this is a very colonial idea. Yeah, those who are not like us, who are not trained technically, they don't have the knowledge, will actually not be able to do well for themselves, and someone paternalistic has to do it for them. So I think the out of the box thinking and reimagining the way in which democratically decision making on how mining funds will be used, DMF funds will be used, is important. Yes, there will be wastages. Yes, there will be contestations, but in the long run, uh, because those wastages are still there, and those adverse effects are still there. But in the long run, a more robust, more healthy, and a more grounded process of use of DMF will emerge. This is what I think.
Yeah. So regarding the implication of DMF, I think what you have rightly mentioned, Professor Kabra, that a part, like while designing the DMF planning or actual implementation, a very need of the hour is participatory inclusion of the community for whose areas the fund will be utilized. So their participatory inclusion should be involved in the entire decision making process instead of just utilizing the DMF as just as a random development fund or just building some school buildings or hospitals. Doesn't work like this because the areas is mining specific and the needs or attention should be very much tailored to their local needs. Uh, so moving forward on another issue, another aspect in the scenario of Indian mining sector is land conflicts or mining induced land conflicts, because mining legislations in India tend to focus more on environmental compliance rather than their socio-cultural consideration, which results in ineffective land rehabilitation because land rehabilitation is something which is done when a coexistence doesn't like it can't happen, and then the area has to be has to be vacated or the people has to be replaced somewhere else. But we also have a existing act which is LARR Act, which is Right to Fair Compensation and Transparency in Land Acquisition, Rehabilitation and Resettlement Act 2013. We have an act in place. So, but we see that there is a widespread mining-induced land conflicts, which results in protest, social unrest, which jeopardize the entire social license to operate. And not only on the community side, the large amount of investment is also getting stalled, or the operation is really getting hampered because of this land conflict. Since you have extensively worked on those issues, on the displacement, resettlement issues, so it will be very, very helpful for us, for all our listeners, to share like how do you think that what are the reforms should we endeavor to adequately address these issues of land conflict? Because globally, the mining induced land conflict is a problem, is a challenge, and in India also, because India is a country of regional diversity, geographical diversity, cultural diversity. So addressing those issues and endeavor on effective land rehabilitation. So how do you perceive those, Professor? Yeah.
Great question. So I think that one thing, we think of land conflicts as a problem. I would just flip that a little bit and say that I think the core reason for land conflicts, land conflicts can also be seen as a testament to the vibrancy of our democracy. Because land conflicts are people saying that, you need what is under our land, but unless you share the wealth that is generated from it, we are not willing to part with, this land, because we live on the land and our livelihoods are on the land. So conflicts are a sign of a well-functioning democracy. That's point number one. Point number two, land conflicts don't always emerge. And the absence of conflicts needs to be also thought through carefully. When do conflicts emerge? Either conflicts are a symptom that there are people who are saying, look, I'm not getting enough from this new land use that you have thought of, which is mining, and I need a fair share of this. And simultaneously, the absence of conflict doesn't mean that everybody is gaining. Sometimes people don't resist, they don't push back because they don't feel that there's going to be any outcome from this long drawn protest. So the political responses to this what I kind of call cheap land grabbing for mining, that era is over. And for a variety of reasons, which people like Michael Levine and Vasudha Chotre and Anandita Adhikari and various others have written about, we can't sort of rely on the passiveness of the rural population anymore. So conflicts will be there unless we can figure out proper ways to make up for the loss of local livelihoods that mining brings about. Now, historically, when we look at how displaced people have been resettled, historically, resettlement has a long history of failure. Yeah, not just in India, but just about elsewhere. A World Bank report looking at World Bank projects which cause displacement actually said that more than 75% of the cases, good resettlement doesn't happen. Now, why does it not happen? Because again, the first wave of or second wave of displacements in mining areas, in dams, etc., just focused on replacing livelihoods with jobs. Now, livelihoods are how you make a living, and livelihoods are diverse, and they are dynamic, they are resilient. And what uh, our imagination of resettlement was give up one member of the family a job in the mining, in the mines or as a driver, or so it's a sort of we are trying to put skill development and employment at the center, but what is ignored is that skill development and uni activity livelihoods have a failed history of at least 6 to 7 decades. Rural livelihoods are diverse. People have a portfolio of activities. You could be a farmer in one season, you could be a wage laborer in one season, one member of your family may be actually earning from a little shop, somebody may be sending out a tractor on contract. So people make their livelihood through these pluri activities, whereas we try and redo livelihoods or rebuild resettled lives through this job-based sort of imagination. And simply doing this again and hoping it will work out for new mining projects is not going to work. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is, of course, that there are a number of workable solutions on how this, how sort of people who are forced to move due to mining can be helped to create sustainable and resilient livelihoods, not just generating formal sector jobs. So look at examples like the Green New Deal and ideas like a universal basic income or a freedom dividend, as it's called in some parts of the world. Now, district level planning and intensive state investment is needed to generate local infrastructures that will kickstart livelihoods, but also examples like the Three Gorges Dam in China tell us that a dedicated monthly cash support, in addition to public infrastructure, is something that displaced communities need for a very long period. And not just one member of the family, because that will then bring in gender and other kind of inequalities. It needs to be a sustained, minimal basic income transfer. And I'm making a distinction between a direct benefit and a basic income. When people know they have a basic income that is going to come, their ability to take risks and settle down in new places improves. And unless we do that and build local level infrastructure, what is called infrastructure with a small I, rather than these large infrastructures in new places, the distribution of benefits in the new places, will be more successful. So four-pronged, I would think. One, we try and minimize and put a hard stop on forced displacement without proper resettlement. But secondly, guaranteed basic income security to the affected population, and not selective, but across the board. And secondly, access to forests, clean air, healthy food, education, these public services, these are absolutely necessary. And in order to do all of this, we will have to put in place schemes which have minimal documentary requirements. They have to be universal in coverage rather than partial. And the question that comes is, oh, but this is going to be too expensive. But the experience of industry is that stalled projects are even more expensive. Yeah. So we end up spending that money anyway, and it doesn't even do anybody anything. And at some point, I'd like to give you many examples of what kind of livelihoods actually work out. But let's leave that for a later question, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, Rajesh Kabra, as you have rightly mentioned that land rehabilitation, effective rehabilitation also comes with a very important point that access to clean air, access to forest, access to a dignified livelihood, not only just direct, some sort of a compensation package or employment opportunity to one adult member in a family, but a sustainable livelihood should be generated in addition with local infrastructure. So these are really very important. Uh, so now, regarding the entire mechanism of the mining operation and the consideration of environmental and socio-cultural factors, so every mining leaseholder has to obtain statutory clearances from different respective state and central government departments in terms of environmental clearance, forest clearance, wildlife clearance. And without getting those clearances, a mining operation cannot start. But however, the complexity of obtaining those clearances and the time cost which is involved, in many cases, what happened is the environmental compliance or the consideration sometimes get little sidelined or weakened in the entire scenario of getting the post-lease clearances. So once the mining lease, the competitive bidding, like in India, the competitive bidding is done, then the final to start the actually mining operation. These are very important and these are very legal compliances and statutory mandatory compliances. So uh, how do you think that how far a balanced approach can be endeavored to streamline the entire post-lease clearances mechanism to facilitate a uninterrupted sustainable mining operation, to create a vibrant economy or mineral-led economy, like what we call, without necessarily weakening the environmental compliance or the socio-cultural consideration. So how do you think that?
That's a tall order, no? Rapid mining along with fast clearances, along with so in other words, how can we have our cake and eat it too?
Yes.
I think that over-regulation is definitely not the answer. The example of the LARRA has taught us that already, that we've tried to create massively complex law with, trying to continuously second guess all the things that can go wrong in the text of the law itself, and trying to plug those gaps in the text of the law. So, more than 100 pages long legal document, and definitely it's over-regulatory in its character. And it doesn't really help, because what happens is that then the assumption is that, oh, this is too complicated. And what emerges is ways, what has emerged. I mean, I don't think any significant sort of large countrywide land acquisitions have happened after the passing of the LARA. What has instead happened is that it has been bypassed. There have been land pooling, lease, voluntary relocation, direct purchase of land. These different bypasses have been found to these kind of regulations. Similarly, environmental clearances. I mean, they're observed more in the violation than in actually doing the proper legal process. So I don't think the answer lies in over-regulation. Also, the answer is not for each project to find. See, sometimes we need to make a difference between individual projects and the overall policy and political landscape in which these projects are playing out. So, to put it very simply, as I've already said, I think the answer lies in democratic decentralization and a robust system of checks and balances, and not in over-regulating and putting regulatory power in the hands of a few officials, which then, as every economist will tell you, is going to result in rent-seeking, delays, and the undermining of the spirit of that regulation in any case. So there have to be accountability, there have to be legal guarantees, like I said, a law that guarantees people benefit sharing, and of course, an independent judiciary and media scrutiny without fear or favor. In other words, you need a well functioning democracy. And if you have a well functioning democracy um, in which uh, profit making and growth and reasonable amounts of mineral extraction is not villainized, but at the same time there is also reasonable checks and balances, uh, then we can move in that direction. And if industry does not commit to this route as much as government and civil society, if we all don't commit to this route of democratic decentralization and a system of checks and balances, then it's likely to be forced on us through land conflicts and through projects being stalled and so on. So I draw your attention to this remarkable book by Michael Levine, where he talks about regimes of dispossession. It's not as if displacement due to mining has always been resisted widely by society or has always been seen as illegitimate. Um, what Levine argues is that, displacing people for public sector projects, which are for the greater common good, had far greater legitimacy. But at the turn of the millennium, when people started being displaced very visibly for private profit of a few, then this system lost its legitimacy. And the legitimacy needs to be recovered so that resource extraction can be sustainably done with social sanction. And for that, the benefits must flow to the bottom of the chain, to the last woman who's impacted. And there have to be assurances. And when those assurances are not met, there have to be independent agencies. The fourth pillar of democracy has to function. And it has to bring to light that these things are happening and the benefits that are promised are not going, without being thought of as being anti-democrat, anti-national or anti-development. So it's very easy to label these things which stand in the way of individual projects. And instead of this kind of labeling, we all collectively need to commit to a system that is more accountable to all of its population, rather than benefiting a few in the short run, which it won't be able to.
Uh, yes, Professor Kabra, the democratic decentralization which you mentioned, or just keeping a constant checks and balances, or just doing a project specific assessment, or giving the beneficiary, like that last person or the last beneficiary in the entire arena of development and conservation and sustainability. This you have rightly mentioned, and thank you for suggesting the book. I will definitely look into it. Also, now moving forward to our conversation, I would really revolve our discussion, which is a very emerging concept now, ESG, or environmental, social, and governance. But I would like to discuss on the ESG factors of critical minerals, because critical minerals is something which is very important in terms of industrial development, energy transition, national security, defense, and also the critical minerals have a supply side risk in terms of the geographical concentration of critical minerals are not very much equitably distributed. For some minerals, we need to depend on other countries, or and the entire critical minerals sector is also emerging. And the requirement of critical minerals is also required in a larger quantity in the low carbon technologies like wind turbines, solar panels, electric vehicles than their traditional based fossil fuel based counterparts. To transition away from a fossil fuel based economy to a low carbon technologies or a critical minerals based economy, ESG factors like non-compliance with ESG factors in terms of human rights violations, consideration like not consideration of human development indicators, then loss of biodiversity, environmental impact, like whatever we have just discussed, it would also be an additional challenge in the entire critical mineral supply chain in terms of India or like globally. So, and also there are a lot of geopolitical tensions also in the entire supply chain of critical minerals. So, how do you think that how can India align with international good practices, like there are international good standards like ICMMs and other gold standards, to incorporate the ESG principles to ensure a resilient supply chain of critical minerals. And to ESG could be an opportunity in this sector and challenges also. So how to convert ESG as a challenges to actually as an opportunity? So how do you perceive those?
I think that everything that I said earlier holds true for critical minerals too, right? It just holds true even more, right? And ESG, again, like development, like sustainability, a lot of these are words that are, I call them not buzzwords, but fuzzwords. The meaning varies from user to user. Yeah, so one person's sustainability can be another person's dispossession, right? So if you look at, for example, the renewable energy transition, that is shifting the energy map of India towards Western and Southern India. Now, in the name of, or in there is a, of course, there is a need to get more energy from renewables than from non-renewables, but it's kind of assumed that because it's renewable, it has no adverse impacts. Whereas the land on which these projects are being set up are actually displacing people and traditional livelihoods, whether it's pastoral or agricultural livelihoods in places in the Thar Desert, in the so-called wastelands. So I think that we need to be very clear about what we mean by sustainability. So, for instance, in critical minerals, what is critical? Yeah. And what are the various, so we need to walk this very fine line where certain things are non-negotiable, making already vulnerable people worse off in some so-called larger national interest is definitely not a good idea of doing development, because the very definition of development is defied when you do that. You must break eggs to make an omelette, but it cannot be then given to someone who's already well fed by taking it from someone who's hungry. So this is true for critical minerals too, right? And we need to be able to make sure that the criticality of getting access to these doesn't ride on worsening social and environmental standards. I think everybody agrees with this. The question is, how do you do this? So, I mean, recovering critical minerals, if we make this crisis narrative, oh, this needs to be done ASAP because climate change, is going to then otherwise become irreversible. So very often in the name of crisis, we do things, we repeat past mistakes, and invariably the burden then falls on the same people who borne the burden of development first, conservation, and now climate change. Invariably it comes and affects the same people, and I think similar risks are there in critical minerals too. So how do you find and recycle the existing stocks which are lying waste? How do you ensure that these safeguards which are necessary for mining in general are also equally strongly kind of felt or implemented in the case of critical minerals? So I mean, very often we don't get into these finer details, and I think that sustainability as a buzzword probably needs to be, if you want a buzzword, then it's justice plus sustainability. Let's call it sustainability, as some people have done. Okay, so if it's non-negotiable, it has to be sustainability that's non-negotiable, which marries sustainability with justice and says both need to be done. And if we're not willing to compromise on either, only then will other viable alternatives emerge. Otherwise, in the name of sustainability, justice gets given the short end of the stick. Yeah. So these are some of the sort of golden principles by which we need to move in the critical mineral sector, as in mining in general.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Kabra. So, as today it was a really insightful discussion, and as we are coming closer, I really, because a lot of things, a lot of avenues which are like getting explored in this conversation. But since time constraint, or since we have a time limitation, we really have to end this discussion. Though I don't want to, but we have to. So I would like to, like, as we are coming closer to this conversation, I would really like to request Professor Kabra to to share some, since you have a very hands-on experience, your two NGOs which also do wonderful works in the entire domain of sustainability. So if you'd like to share as a closing remarks or parting thought of today's very engaging discussion, you'd like to share some of your field experiences where effective rehabilitation or effective coexistence has happened very briefly. So it would be very helpful for all our listeners, and as a good concluding, thought, food for thought for all of us. Yeah.
Sure. See, first I want to say that mm, I think we continue to justify displacement in the name of some big idea, whether it's development, conservation, sustainability, climate change mitigation, whatever. And I think that um, all the experience of the last 100 years across the world has told us that large scale displacement and resettlement is not really something that can be done successfully. We have so few success stories, and even those success stories don't stand the test of time. They can be successful for a short while, but one generation down, the successes get dissipated. So I think that if we just drop this myth that displacing people is inevitable for development, and that you can resettle people and bring them development, and that you can do it voluntarily and with people's participation. Yeah. So long as you can find some magic bullet best practices and replicate them, I don't think this is doable. Which means that we need to let go of these myths. And unless we do so, new directions won't emerge. Yeah. Uh, Look at solar energy. For the longest time, because we didn't let go of the fossil fuel is inevitable myth, solar did not become viable. Right? It's only when you let go of that myth that some alternatives emerge. Our interventions make them more viable. So there is that. Learning from my own experience of working with a displaced community, one thing is very clear that once you have displaced someone, um, it takes years and years for them to stand back on their feet, and those years are traumatic years. And one finds these very loose statements being thrown around. I went and met this displaced family, and they were happy. Now, this happiness is not in any way quantified. I mean, people have to make a living on an everyday basis. Just because you were displaced once doesn't mean you have to be miserable every day to prove that that idea was a failure, right? People make a living on a daily basis. They also laugh, they dance, they do many things. That doesn't mean that the displacement itself was deeply traumatic for them. And projects don't get it because projects have a project timeline, whereas our lifetimes have a much longer timeline. Again, I don't want to sort of end on a sad note, but I also do not want us, our key takeaway to be that it is possible to do large scale displacements and resettlements. And there is a way to, there is a magic bullet. Magic bullets, like all bullets, will kill, right? So where mining is a particularly tricky sector because it's not possible to have people on the land and get what is under the land. But in most other situations, conservation, it's possible to actually have ways to share the land between multiple uses and actually not dispossess people. Where it is inevitable, ideas like the DMF, which have a longer lifespan than the projects. You put the money, it accrues every year, and then it has to go for supporting smallholder activities, localized schemes. And I found that with all these years of working in Chambal, I find that in addition to our cost benefit analyses that we do for projects, where we try and do a financial as well as an environmental cost benefit analysis. and even a social cost benefit analysis, I think it's important to bring in the scale of of impact into the discussion. So let me leave you with this idea that the standard cost benefit analysis of mining projects should be changed to local cost benefit analysis. That means the key metric to monitor a project, whether it's successful or not, is its distance to the beneficiary and the affected community. We need to promote projects that maximize local benefits and minimize local costs. And vice versa. We need to penalize projects that create more local costs and take away the benefits to distant areas. In the work that we've done, what we've tried to do is make sure that everything that was lost by the local people is made up through local level infrastructure development, local level educational interventions, and enough money and enough time and enough resources have to be put in the local economy that is destroyed due to these projects. So a local cost benefit analysis with minimum assured income support over a very long run, which can then help to revitalize the economy of the people who are affected, are the ways forward. But at the very least, we need to find ways to make displacement the minimum possible, and accountability has to be fixed. Why do you need to move people? Right now, we do it because it's easiest to do that, and everything else is too challenging, and also because you can get away with it. So all of these have to change. Some very systemic changes need to happen for this. And now mining is not even financially viable unless these things are done, because local resistance can become a very big project risk.
Yes, Professor Kabra, as you have rightly mentioned, all those issues, very informative, very insightful, and you have like a very important thing that while we talk about the success stories, we have to, reshape or rethink our ideas of intergenerational security, intergenerational success. Not only success to one generation or giving just jobs or livelihoods to one generation, it has to be like throughout the generation based on the local needs. Yes, so today's discussion, as we are concluding the discussion, it was very informative, insightful. Thank you for joining with us today. And it actually
Pleasure.
gives us a lot of food for thoughts for all our listeners, researchers like us, a lot of stakeholders to industry, government, non-government, across the sector, a lot of things on sustainability, how we should think, rethink, learn, unlearn about the ideas. So thank you once again for joining with us today, and we look forward to more such engagements in future, hopefully in person at CSEP. Next time we'd like to host you. And today I'm very fortunate to host you for such an engagement and insightful discussion. Thank you so much, Professor Kabra.
Thank you, Tanima.
Have a good day.